So today we're talking, this is our wrap-up session, but it's our 8th session and it's our wrap-up. So we're going to do just a brief overview of things we've done, and then we're also offering the opportunity to set up one-on-one consultations with either myself or Dr. Dornheim. Okay. So these are just some resources that we have here in terms of where we're located when we are working on campus. So now, of course, we're working remotely because of the coronavirus, but typically we'd be at the MMC campus in SHC 270, and then on the BBC campus in WUC 320. Here on the screen is our phone number. You can call in to make an appointment. We also have after hours, and if you need to speak with a clinician, then you can also be connected with someone as well. This is just a quick overview of some of the services that we do offer. So we do have some self-help resources, which you can find on our website. Those include Cognito, which is a program that you can use when you're wanting to have a difficult conversation with someone else. So it is really helpful because it provides you with like role plays and strategies and skills that you can really use and practice. We have online self-help modules and screenings, and that ranges from anxiety, depression, relationship difficulties, mindfulness. It's just a wide range of different topic areas that you can see which fits and seems suitable for you. We're also offering, now that we're working remotely, we're doing therapy through a video conference or over the telephone, and that's through a software called Therapy Assisted Online. Typically we offer individual, group, and couples counseling, but now that we're working remote, we're only offering individual and group. We'd also typically be offering psychoeducational testing, so learning disabilities, ADHD, and now, unfortunately, we're not able to provide those services, but that was what kind of initiated this process of the ADHD workshops. So this is meant to be psychoeducational in nature and provide students with skills and strategies that they might try. We also are still offering our psychiatric services, and we have, I think, weekly or monthly updates on the podcast on the website. So those are all things that you can check out. Okay, so our sister program is called the Victim Empowerment Program, also known as VEP. And this is also a confidential service. The specialty in this component of our office is that they are focusing in on students who are experiencing issues related to sexual assault, relationship abuse, stalking, hazing, hate crimes, and other violent crimes. And so the difference with a clinician in VET versus in CAPS is that these clinicians, they can provide accompaniment, so they can go with you to court hearings. If you're wanting to initiate a restraining order or meet with an attorney, they're there to really advocate for you and accompany you to make sure that you're feeling supported and help you navigate the process. In addition, they're also able to advocate for you in terms of your classes, registration, talking with professors. And so they're really a good resource in different elements. And so if this is something that feels like it's aligned with issues that you're experiencing, this is also an alternative to meeting with a more specialized part of the counseling center. Okay, so I'm just gonna go quickly over these things because these are just nicer looking versions of what I've just talked about. This is the site that you can go to directly access Cognito. And here we have our little kiwi. Okay, so now we'll just do a recap of things that we've gone over. And if you attended the first session, or if you remember the first session, and even if you weren't there, what we talked about was the overall diagnosis of ADHD and the criteria that we have to meet in order to receive that diagnosis. And we explained a bit more about what symptoms the diagnosis entails and what that might look like in someone's life. And so just as a quick recap, for someone to be diagnosed with ADHD, they have to present with 6 or more symptoms of inattention and or hyperactivity and impulsivity. And these symptoms are often present before the age of 12 and have been persistent until adulthood in up to 70% of the cases. And so while this might not 100% of the time be true, what we see is that oftentimes there is a childhood onset in those difficulties. So a student coming in, we're oftentimes asking about their history and when these difficulties started, because that is oftentimes a telltale of, you know, what that has looked like over someone's lifetime. Someone with ADHD, the difficulties that they are likely to encounter in higher education. We talked a bit about, you know, the academic implications and the difficulties that people have due to those difficulties with executive functioning, meaning like planning, organization, even motivation. But then we also really looked at the emotional component and the personality difficulties that are accompanied with that. So they kind of build off of each other or go hand in hand. And so someone with ADHD, what we know is that they're more likely to experience more emotional instability and low self-esteem. It can be harder for someone with ADHD to inhibit an impulse, meaning if they're having an urge to do something or say something in a moment, they're more likely to act on it versus inhibiting that or thinking about it a little bit before engaging. And so we see that they might intervene in conversations or they might say things that are maybe off topic because their mind has gone to something else. And that oftentimes looks different in a social setting. It's harder for them to make those meaningful connections, and then which then impacts the way that they think about themselves. If you also think about like their approach to their academics, if a student has been attempting to do something over and over and still receiving the same results of, you know, the academic difficulties, that's also then impacting their self-esteem. That it's like, it's not for a lack of effort, but even as much as I try, I'm not producing the results that I want. And so that in turn turns it inward of like, what's wrong with me? How come everyone else is able to do these things? Why am I having such a hard time? And so we see a lot of those emotional components as well. And I think, you know, those are key things to really focus in on when we are having those difficulties, that they're not usually mutually exclusive, that they kind of go off of each other. So I kind of mentioned some of the interpersonal difficulties and the social rejection that students might experience because of those difficulties with knowing like when to interject in a conversation or quickly changing a topic and things like that. So the social skills component is really going to be something that's detrimental to their ability to develop those interpersonal relationships. And then, of course, we see the difficulties with academic planning, that, you know, what we know is that as college students, you go from maybe a more structured high school setting or having your parents in the home or your caregivers or whoever it is that you live with, and then moving into a setting where you have a lot of agency and ability to pick your schedule, you know, pick what time classes are, what you're doing in between classes, when you're doing your homework, managing when things are due. And so with all those things happening at the same time, we can see that poor class attendance, a lack of parental supervision, that can also aggravate those difficulties. And so someone who might have these difficulties in high school, that might be exacerbated or feel more intense when they transition into college. So treatment options. What are some options for someone who is either diagnosed with ADHD or they're experiencing a lot of these symptoms and would like to try interventions to see their response to it? Medication is seen to be a way to intervene. Cognitive behavioral therapy. And what the research shows is that these two elements together, so medication alone is likely not going to be sustainable, in that if the student, if you or whoever is on the medication stops taking it, then the symptoms are then re-emerging. Versus if you're working hand in hand with the therapy, you're able to learn more adaptive strategies and coping skills to be able to counteract those neurobiological difficulties. And so what we've also seen is that mindfulness has been shown to produce positive outcomes for students with ADHD. We also have the DRC, which is the Disability Resource Center, and that is an excellent resource on campus for students to be able to navigate and access information in the way that best meets their needs and the way that they learn the best. And so that is something that we really recommend that students be in touch with the DRC if they do have a diagnosis and or would like accommodations. So then in session 2, we moved on to how do we control our stress? We're looking at how do we manage ourselves? How do we stay on top of all the different demands of college? College is very stressful, and it's also a major change in life. And so because I think sometimes we have this fantasy that we're starting something new, those difficulties will leave them in the past. And what we know is that while that would be ideal, that typically doesn't happen. And those difficulties present themselves maybe in similar ways or even in different ways. And so if you think about the high workload, if you're living on campus, moving away from your family, starting new friendships, maybe there's illness or travel, moving. And I think this last one is a big one, overcommitment, taking on too many things. You're eager, you want to be involved in all these things, but not being able to manage all the different responsibilities that you have within that. So how does stress and college impact one's ADHD? So if you have been already diagnosed with ADHD, treated for, or received special accommodations, you don't need to hide your diagnosis or stop treatment. College, again, increases that stress level. And if you don't have those adequate structures in place or strategies in place, those difficulties might even feel more intense or more disruptive in terms of your functioning. So what we recommend is that you continue treatment if you were in treatment before, or seek treatment if you've never been in treatment before, to be able to work on these things. And again, the DRC as a resource to get accommodations as well. If you are someone who does not have a diagnosis, but you think that, wait, these symptoms really align with what I'm experiencing, I think sometimes we try to talk ourselves out of it or ignore it or say this is just a temporary thing. We recommend that you don't, validate that you're experiencing these difficulties, and not now, but when we're on campus, we offer ADHD screening. So you can come into CAPS for a walk-in, and you can also set up an ADHD screening. Now, a screening is not meant to diagnose, but more so looking at the symptoms and if they are consistent with symptoms that are within the criteria for ADHD. So that would be something that's helpful in order to navigate, okay, what do I do next? What do I pursue next? Oftentimes we do that process of going through the screening. If that's elevated and the symptoms are consistent with ADHD, we move forward with psychoeducational testing. And this type of testing is a battery of different types of assessments. So we're assessing for different things. We're assessing for things like your IQ, your academic functioning, your memory, your cognitive flexibility, your ability to take information in and process it. So we're looking at all these different components and helping you navigate what are your personal strengths and also areas of weaknesses that you need to either work on or find accommodations to help you succeed. Okay. So, of course, this is very relevant to what's happening in our world right now, but coping with coronavirus. How do we manage our anxiety around that, but also how do we maintain our attention and focus? So we want to get facts, not fakes. We want to go to appropriate websites that promote knowledge. So, for example, the WHO. We want to limit worries and agitation. So, whether if that's from watching the news or checking social media frequently, it's really paying attention to how that impacts you and makes you feel. And then using your skills that help you overcome adverse situations. We've been through difficult things in our life, maybe not to this extreme, but really digging deep into those skills that we already have within us, things that have worked for us in the past. We want to seek support from others, whether that's our family, our friends, clinicians at CAPS, online resources, blog posts, whatever it is that helps you feel connected and helps you feel supported. And still being able to tune into gratitude and celebrating the positive, that there are always things to be grateful for. And while it's really difficult right now, finding ways to help yourself have even small moments where you can tune into that. And then this last one, I think, is really important, maintaining routines as much as possible. So, setting up that structure within your day, waking up at a certain time, changing out of your pajamas, even if you're still just hanging out in your living room, really helping yourself go through those transitions and maybe even planning your day around like one activity. So those are just some tips that we offered in relation to coping with the pandemic that we're all in right now. Okay, so then we moved on to controlling our time and our schedule. So that is related to time management. We provided some resources, which I think are really cool resources that I've never even, I wish I had some of these during college, but, to be able to use these things to help organize yourself and it gives you reminders and helps you color code and organize things in a way that makes sense for you. So these are some ones on the screen here that we presented. So even if you weren't at that workshop, you can write these down or take a picture and just try them out. See which ones you like, which ones feel good, and that can be a good place to start. Again,
no.
On the vein of time management, sometimes it's helpful to take a timer and we choose a task that we want to do, whether that's an assignment or a house-related task, a work-related task. And we're doing this to estimate how long it will take us to finish. So this is oftentimes because I think in terms of time management, we say like, oh, estimate how long this is going to be. However, sometimes people truly don't know how long it takes them. And so this is a good way to gauge, like, how long do I take to do something? And so we recommend setting a timer for 25 minutes. When the timer rings, mark it on a paper, take a 5-minute break, and then come back to it. Set the timer again for another 25 minutes. When the timer rings, take another 5-minute break. And you do this 4 times. So you're doing that for 2 hours. And after you're finished, you want to check how much time it's taken you and how much you've done within those 25 minutes. And that's a really helpful way to gauge. It's also looking at, okay, am I procrastinating? Am I wasting time within these 25-minute blocks? And if you are, then it's reevaluating, like maybe there's a way to go through something quicker. Then we looked at prioritization. How do we prioritize the things that we need to do? What we know is that in college, we have many assignments that are kind of pending at the same time. And a way to help ourselves manage or kind of differentiate where to start or what to focus on is using a grid kind of like this. So we want to look at the things that are important to us first and the things that are urgent. So these are things like crises, last minute projects, homeworks, things that pop up, maybe things that you've forgotten. And then we look at important and then not urgent. So we want to incorporate planning for long-term projects, planning assignments and the due dates, looking in chronological order when things are due, but also thinking how much work is going to be put into each one and when are you going to do it. Again, we cannot plan for interruptions. Like we don't know when life is going to happen and things get thrown off. So we also prioritizing, like some things pop up and they need to be done right away, but some things don't. And so it's using this grid to help you organize, where can that go? Where can this go? Like something unexpectedly popped up. Do I have to complete this right now, or can I get to it tomorrow when I have this block of time? And so this grid, I think, is a really helpful way to help yourself organize and assess where to start and how much time you're spending on each thing. Okay, so then we talked about study skills. And I think sometimes, we always hear like, you should be studying, you should be doing this. And oftentimes I hear from students like, I don't know how to study. In high school, I didn't study. I don't really know what that looks like. And so we really broke it down into how do we manage not only our studying skills, but our study space, and the time of day that we're studying and things like that. So some key points from that session is that we want to schedule study sessions in advance to avoid distractions. Meaning, like we just said, things pop up, things might change from day to day, but if we can block things in and schedule it ahead of time, we're less likely to be veered off by other things that might come up. In studying, we want to identify goals for studying. So we want those goals to be attainable, so goals that you know that you can succeed, but also goals that are more specific. So instead of saying like, oh, I'm going to work on this paper today, maybe saying like, I'm going to work on the introduction and a part of the first part of the body of this paper, and being specific in terms of, or if you're working on math, like how many problems are you going to work on today? And so it's helping yourself lay things out in a more structured way, but also in a way that you know that you can achieve them. We want to be realistic in our expectations. I think this is often one that we don't think about, a reward for reaching study goals. It's something that we often do with kids, but I don't know why as we get older we don't do that for ourselves. So it's finding things that are a reward for you. So maybe it's watching a movie or a Netflix show, playing a game after you've completed what you've set out to do. And that reinforces and helps kind of keep the motivation of that process of engaging with, our to-do list. Then within the actual study sessions, we want to start by organizing content to be studied in chunks. So if you have a chemistry test coming up, it's dividing it into sections, not saying like, okay, I'm going to look at the whole chemistry book during the study session, but instead like being specific to, I'm looking at chapter 1, doing a self-test, and then chapter 2. So being intentional in what you're studying, and it limits boredom during long sessions. So you can spend this amount of time on chapter 1, you take a break, you come back, you're switching to chapter 2. Like we mentioned earlier on, we want to schedule a 5-minute break every 20 minutes using a timer, and a longer break after the 4th 20 minutes. If you have trouble concentrating, you want to schedule in multiple or shorter sessions. I think sometimes we have unrealistic expectations that we're going to maintain focus for 3 hours, when the truth is, our brains are really not meant to sustain that type of attention for that length of time. So when people tell me that, it kind of makes sense that, that
we have kind of 20 minutes brains.
Exactly. So really, really honoring that. And it's not that you have less stamina or you're weaker because you need 20 minutes, but it's more because that's how our brains are wired. And sometimes we're able to push it beyond that, but it's also still healthy and okay to step away for 5 minutes and come back. And then a main one here is not studying when you're tired, because at that point you're not retaining any information, and that information is not being consolidated into your brain. And tomorrow when you look back at it, you're not going to remember what it was that you read or tried to study. Okay, so now we're looking at just scheduling and making ourselves timetables and things that help guide our work. And so how do we maximize our study time? So it's attending class, not missing class. That's a big part of where we learn the information that's important to what we need to know. Also, always going prepared to class. So reading the material that you need to read and bringing any additional material that you need specific for that class. Another one is sitting in the front and center of the class. You want to minimize the distractions. So oftentimes when people are saying, oh, I'm sitting in the back of the class with my computer up and my phone on, but I can't focus, that's kind of my first question of like, these different things. Why don't we try moving to the front, moving to the center, taking those distractions away, maybe keeping your phone in your backpack, all these different things that can help minimize those things, those distractions. Shut it off. So maybe turn the phone off even. I know that sounds extreme, but sometimes it takes, distancing yourself from those different things. Taking meticulous notes by hand, writing. So writing has been shown to be a more effective study strategy than typing because it activates more brain centers and helps with memorization and the consolidation of that information. And then when we're studying or reviewing notes or going over class material, we want to take notes with an exam in mind. So paying attention to the content of what professors emphasize. They might come back to certain things or highlight like you need to know this. So really making notes of that and reminding yourself in those class notes that these are going to be important topics. I think using highlighters, things like that can also help remind you as you're looking back through your notes. Okay, so work. Our mindset is so important. So the way that we're approaching something or thinking about something is going to sometimes impact the way that we feel about it. And so if you have a big assignment, saying to yourself, I will never get it done, that's really different from saying, this is really hard, but I can eventually get it done if I break it down. And so it's helping yourself shift that lens of shifting the way that you're thinking about it and approaching it. Another example is, I'll never complete everything on time. A more positive or a shift in that perspective is that I will focus on one thing at a time. It might take longer, but I'm going to focus on one thing at a time. Going back to the idea of what we talked about earlier of organizing our workspace, working in a tidy workspace is going to help you be more effective than having things kind of all over the place. When you're in a tidy workspace, you're more able to find the things that you need. You're not losing any papers or information. That's also important. And it can help, significantly help with decreasing your stress and anxiety related to, just task management. Back to the phone, ignoring notifications. I know sometimes we're constantly getting input of text or Instagram or emails or whatever it is, but really being able to put that aside and fully focus in on the work that you're doing. Sometimes if you can have a shorter time span of 100% focused work, you get more done than if you're doing an hour of multitasking and doing different things. And then the last one here, physical movement. So stretching, walking, really using that outlet as a way to also reduce stress. Again, you want to pay attention to how you feel. If you're starting to feel burnt out, meaning you're feeling like, that you don't really have much left to give to the different responsibilities and tasks that you have, it's asking for help, like really getting support in those different ways. We also recommend having to-do lists and using those, especially before bed, so that you can have those things written down and not have to hold them in your mind. Like, have you ever been sleeping and you wake up and you're like, oh, I need to remember this for the morning, but you lay there constantly thinking about it because you want to remember it, but then that's impacting your sleep. And you're going to wake up tired and that sets you off on the wrong foot for the next day. So it's really helping yourself kind of like unload your mind onto a to-do list before bed, and then stepping away from it and getting rest for the next day. Speaking of rest, a good night's sleep is always important. So less than 7 hours of sleep has been shown to increase anxiety. 8 hours seems to be the prime of the optimal amount of sleep for someone. And that's going to be really important, not just for your mood and the way that you feel, but also for your brain functioning. So the way that your brain is able to manipulate and manage, recall information, that is also highly dependent on, how rested and how much sleep it's able to get. So this one kind of builds on what we talked about earlier in terms of like blocking out times and estimating how long things will take. I think sometimes we can reduce the time that we think a task will take. And instead of 60 minutes to read and answer emails, set it at 30 minutes and check what you get done. 30 minutes without anything else and see what you get done. You can break tasks into smaller parts and make them look more achievable. So again, these are just some strategies that you can try and test out and see what those feel like. So to our last session, we talked a lot about professionalism. How do we present ourselves? How are we in the workplace? And how do we engage with coworkers, employers, customers, clients, whatever it is, like what does that look like for us? And what we know is that employers want new workers to be responsible, ethical, team-oriented, and to possess strong communication, interpersonal, and problem-solving skills. So when you think about all those different layers of things, that's essentially what we talk about when we're talking about professionalism. We're talking about different ways of interacting, different ways of presenting ourselves, and the integrity to the work that you're doing. So on the next slide, we're going to look at some quick tips of being a good employee and a good team player. So this is an exercise that we had everyone do just to get a gauge on their perceived level of professionalism. So getting to work on time. If I'm going to be late, I'll call and let my boss know. I rarely miss work. If I'm going to miss work, I let my boss know. I work as hard as I can. I pay close attention to my work. I do my work as I'm told. I'm friendly. I try to problem solve. I follow safety and company rules. I use materials and equipment properly. I behave professionally. So these are just some examples of, things that you want to be thinking about while you're engaging in any professional setting. And that doesn't have to be confined to an office. That could be, meeting with prospective employers, meeting with professors, meeting with committees that you are on campus. And so these are all things that we want to keep in mind, that professionalism is not just the quality of the work we're doing, but the way that we present ourselves, the way we engage with others, the integrity that we have to the work that we're doing. So yeah, that brings us to the end of our recap. I know that was a quick run through. We went over a lot of material in a really short time. And we just want to say thank you for everyone who joined. We found it to be a really enjoyable and enriching experience, and we hope it was for you as well. We were hoping to have breakout rooms and just to do one-on-one consultations for any individual questions that people might have. Dr. Dornheim, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Students who would like to have individual coaching can call at the counseling center, which is 305-348-2277 to make an appointment with either me or Mandy. Dr. Reed.
Perfect.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.